There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from wanting too much and believing that wanting itself is wrong. It shows up in moments that look harmless on the surface. A promotion you don't fully pursue. A relationship you downplay even when you're unhappy. A dream you soften when you talk about it, as if lowering your voice might make it less offensive to the world. The guilt isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It hums quietly underneath every desire, reminding you to be careful, to be modest, to not ask for more than your share. You've learned to treat ambition like something fragile. Something that needs to be justified. Something that must come with an apology attached. Not because you don't want more, but because somewhere along the way, wanting more became linked to danger. Danger of disappointing someone. Danger of being seen as ungrateful. Danger of losing connection. So instead of reaching, you hesitate. Instead of expanding, you compress. Instead of saying this matters to me, you say it's fine, really. And every time you do, something inside you tightens, not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally. Like a muscle that never fully relaxes. The paradox is cruel. The very restraint that once kept you safe, that made you likable, acceptable, easy to love, is now the thing quietly limiting your life. You didn't learn this guilt as an adult. You inherited it. It was absorbed long before you had language for it, back when your nervous system was still learning what it cost to take up space. And that's where the story really begins. For some children, love is not something you rest in. It's something you maintain. You learn early which versions of yourself are welcomed and which ones create tension in the room. Which emotions are tolerated. Which desires make adults uncomfortable. Which needs feel like they arrive at the wrong time, in the wrong tone, with the wrong intensity. So you adapt. You become attuned. You scan faces. You listen between words. You sense when your excitement is too much, when your sadness is inconvenient, when your hunger, emotional or otherwise, stretches the patience of the people you depend on. And quietly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, you internalize a rule. Wanting less keeps people closer. This is not a conscious choice. It's a survival adjustment. A child doesn't stop wanting because they mature. They stop wanting because they learn what wanting costs. Over time, desire becomes associated with friction. With guilt. With a subtle withdrawal of warmth. So your system does the only thing it knows how to do, it reduces the signal. It learns to be satisfied with what's available. It reframes longing as selfishness. It confuses contentment with emotional self-erasure. And it works. At least for a while. You become the child who doesn't ask for much. The one who understands. The one who doesn't create problems. On the outside, this looks like emotional intelligence, gratitude, maturity beyond your years. On the inside, it feels like a quiet contraction, a constant effort to keep your desires small enough to be safe. That pattern doesn't disappear when you grow up. It evolves. As an adult, the guilt no longer needs an external authority to enforce it. You carry it yourself. It shows up as hesitation right before growth. As overthinking opportunities. As a strange discomfort when things start going too well. As an internal voice that asks, who do you think you are to want this? This is silent self-sabotage, not driven by fear of failure, but by fear of outgrowing the version of yourself that learned how to be loved. And until that fear is named, it continues to quietly shape your choices, convincing you that playing small is humility, when in reality, it's an old protection mechanism that no longer knows when to stand down. At some point, the guilt stops feeling like guilt. It starts feeling like character. It disguises itself as realism. As humility. As being grounded. You tell yourself you're not settling, you're being mature. You're not shrinking, you're being reasonable. You're not holding back, you're just not chasing illusions like other people do. But underneath that narrative sits an invisible contract you never consciously agreed to. A contract that says, if I don't want too much, I won't be disappointed. If I don't reach too far, I won't destabilize what I already have. If I don't take more, I won't risk being seen as greedy, needy, or ungrateful. This contract lives in the body more than the mind. It tightens the chest when ambition sparks. It slows your steps when momentum builds. It introduces doubt precisely at the moment when clarity should arrive. Not because something is wrong, but because something is changing. Psychologically, this is not a lack of confidence. It is conditioned inhibition. When early environments link desire with relational cost, the nervous system learns to interrupt expansion before it can threaten attachment. The brain becomes exquisitely skilled at detecting the emotional edge, the moment where growth might create distance, envy, imbalance, or rejection. So the system applies brakes. Not dramatically. Not consciously. Subtly. Quietly. Convincingly. Opportunities are reinterpreted as risks. Wanting more money becomes shame about materialism. Wanting more connection becomes fear of being demanding. Wanting more freedom becomes guilt about abandoning responsibility. Each desire is translated into a moral problem instead of a signal of life moving forward. This is why the self-sabotage feels so clean, so rational, so justified. You're not afraid of success itself. You're afraid of what success might say about you, and what it might take away. Because somewhere deep inside, success is still associated with a loss of belonging. There is a grief that doesn't come from losing something, but from never fully letting yourself have it. It's the grief of watching your own life plateau while telling yourself it's enough. Of feeling potential stretch inside you while actively managing it down. Of sensing that you could move differently, live wider, speak more honestly, and choosing restraint instead. This grief rarely looks dramatic. It looks like quiet dissatisfaction. Like low-level numbness. Like the constant sense that something important is being delayed until conditions feel safer, cleaner, more deserved. But conditions never become safe enough for a nervous system trained to equate desire with danger. So the waiting continues. Philosophically, this is the tragedy of misplaced loyalty. Loyalty to an earlier version of yourself that survived by minimizing impact. Loyalty to family systems that couldn't hold your expansion. Loyalty to an identity built around being low maintenance, easy, grateful. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. But there is another burden that goes unnamed, the unlived life of the self that learned to stay small in order to be acceptable. The internal conflict sharpens here. Because part of you knows that wanting more does not make you disloyal. It makes you alive. And another part is still terrified that stepping fully into desire will rupture something essential, even if that something no longer exists. So you live in a compromise. You allow yourself controlled dreams. Measured risks. Safe ambitions that don't disrupt your sense of moral balance. And in doing so, you preserve safety at the cost of vitality. This is not a personal failure. It is a protective strategy that outlived its original purpose. And until it's recognized as such, it will continue to quietly govern how much life you allow yourself to touch. There is a quiet but radical shift that happens when guilt is no longer treated as a warning, but as information. Not something to obey. Something to observe. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Almost unsafe. Because guilt has acted like an internal authority for so long. It decided what was allowed. What was too much. What needed to be dialed back. Letting go of that authority doesn't feel like freedom at first, it feels like disorientation. But this is where the pattern begins to loosen. Because the nervous system can only interrupt desire automatically when the mind believes the interruption is necessary. The moment awareness enters, the reflex starts to slow. You begin to notice the exact point where momentum collapses. The familiar tightening. The inner voice that reframes expansion as irresponsibility. And instead of obeying it, you pause. You don't override it with positivity. You don't argue with it. You simply witness it. This is psychologically significant, because self-sabotage thrives on unconscious loyalty. Once it's seen clearly, once it's recognized as a learned response rather than a truth, it loses its moral authority. The desire doesn't disappear. The guilt doesn't disappear either. But now they coexist. And something important changes. Desire stops needing justification. You begin to understand that wanting more is not a demand on the world. It's not an accusation against the past. It's not a rejection of what you already have. It's simply the nervous system signaling readiness for expansion. Readiness, not entitlement. This distinction matters, because it reframes growth as an internal alignment rather than an external grab. You're no longer trying to take more. You're allowing yourself to receive what your system is capable of holding now. And for the first time, guilt doesn't get the final word. The resolution of this conflict isn't about silencing guilt. It's about outgrowing it. Outgrowing the version of you that had to measure worth through restraint. Outgrowing the belief that safety is maintained through self-denial. Outgrowing the internal rule that says peace must be earned by limitation. Wanting more does not fracture your integrity. Suppressing yourself does. When desire is allowed to exist without shame, it becomes grounded. Clear. Less frantic. Less compensatory. It no longer needs to erupt in bursts or collapse into avoidance. It settles into direction. This is what wholeness feels like, not endless striving, but internal permission. Permission to want without apology. Permission to grow without betrayal. Permission to expand without explaining yourself. The self that emerges here is not reckless. It is regulated. It doesn't abandon responsibility, it redefines it. Responsibility no longer means protecting everyone else from discomfort. It means honoring the life force moving through you. Quietly. Steadily. Without theatrics. And here's the truth that changes everything. You were never sabotaging success because you didn't deserve it. You were protecting belonging because, once, it was fragile. That protection kept you alive. But it doesn't have to keep you small. The moment you allow yourself to want more without collapsing into guilt is the moment the pattern breaks. Not violently. Not dramatically. But permanently. Because from that point on, your life is no longer negotiated through fear, but guided by truth. And that truth doesn't demand that you become someone else. It simply asks that you finally stop abandoning yourself.